Okay, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the International Symposium on Addressing Conspiracy Theories through Education. My name is Dan Sobowitz. I'll be your host for this event organized by UNESCO, the European Jewish Congress, in cooperation with the European Commission, the Alfred Landeke Foundation, and the Cambridge University Social Decision Making Lab. So what are conspiracy theories? Have they always been around, and are they always going to stay? Are we living through some peak right now? When do they cross the line from innocent nonsense to dangerous ideas that really threaten our social cohesion? And perhaps most importantly, what are the most proven methods, ways for us to tackle them, address them in an effective way? So these are the kind of questions we'll be discussing today with political leaders, with researchers, with civil society, with various practitioners from across sectors who are going to tell us about their methods and their proven ideas of what works when it comes to conspiracy theories. A few housekeeping rules. So we are broadcasting this across the social media channels of UNESCO, if I'm not mistaken, in LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We are doing it bilingual, so I'm speaking English, but if you're watching me now in French and you prefer English, that is also available, so make sure that you're watching the right channel. Same here in the room. If you prefer French, most of the speakers will speak English, but the entire event is available in both languages. We're going to start with a brief message of the host organizations, namely UNESCO and the European Jewish Congress, as well as the Alfred Landeke Foundation. We will start with Director General Audrey Azoulay, who is not able to come and be with us today, but she did send us a recorded message that I'd like us to take a look at.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you for this important symposium on addressing conspiracy theories through education. Because when it comes to conspiracy theories, there are several errors we should not make. One is finding theories amusing when they are completely absurd. Because there's nothing funny about conspiracy theories. They wreak havoc, they foster hatred, and undermine democracies. And these theories have traction, and thinking they do not is a second error we should not make. For conspiracy theories, lies and distortions are often more striking, more engaging than the truth, and their resonance has grown as the internet has expanded, especially on social networks whose business models depend on user engagement above all else. Consequently, on Twitter, studies have shown that lies spread 6 times faster than the truth. We must accept that regulation of these platforms is needed. On this issue, UNESCO is leading global consultations to propose smarter regulation to improve access to reliable information, to support greater transparency while preserving freedom of expression. But also, from a more structural point of view, we need to galvanize the power of education in this field. In this ocean of information, of disinformation, of misinformation, education fosters critical thinking and civic and social engagement. And this is part of UNESCO's mandate, and this is at the heart of our action with our partners, including the European Commission, thank you very much, the Alfred Landeke Foundation, the Cambridge University Social Decision Making Lab, and the European Jewish Congress. Thanks to them, with their support, with their involvement, we are taking action, particularly to address concerning rise in conspiracy theories triggered by the pandemic. We launched a global communications campaign with the European Commission and the World Jewish Congress to alert about the dangers of conspiracy theories and misinformation. We also worked with the European Commission to support 30,000 journalists in 157 countries so they could bring truth to light while covering the health crisis. And again, with the World Jewish Congress, we launched a project in 2021 to fight Holocaust denial and distortion on the internet. Now, when users search for Holocaust content on Facebook or TikTok, they are invited to visit the website aboutholocaust.org for reliable information. These campaigns are extremely important. But the fight against conspiracy theories, the anti-Semitic and racist ideologies they often convey, begins at school. Yet, teachers worldwide lack the adequate training. That's why today, UNESCO is launching a practical guide for educators so they can better teach students how to identify and debunk conspiracy theories. This builds on the wider work we're doing to strengthen media and information literacy based upon our new model curriculum. It was launched last year to better prepare learners to navigate a world of algorithm, artificial intelligence, and invasive data collection. Ladies and gentlemen, Hannah Arendt said, "Freedom of opinion is a farce unless factual information is guaranteed and the facts themselves are not in dispute." Together, we are not only defending the idea of truth, we are also defending healthy democratic debate based on facts. I thank you.
Healthy democratic debate based on facts. This was Director General Audrey Azoulay from UNESCO and our co-host, the European Jewish Congress. Unfortunately, President Ariel Mozikant, due to unexpected health issues, is not able to be with us today, but we are very fortunate to have with us Executive Vice President and CEO of the European Jewish Congress, Raya Kadenova. Please, the floor is yours.
Dear friends, dear colleagues, on behalf of the European Jewish Congress, the representative umbrella organization for national Jewish communities in Europe, I would like to thank you for this important and timely initiative on addressing conspiracy theories through education. There is nothing new under the sun, wrote the wise King Solomon. And when it comes to the spread of conspiracy theories, it does indeed seem that we have been here before and many times. When events are seemingly inexplicable, fear, uncertainty, and ignorance drive people to simplistic explanations. Today, with a global pandemic, followed by war on the European continent, on a scale never seen since World War II, we find ourselves again in such period. And while the ways in which conspiracy theories spread may have changed, their content remains remarkably similar. Jewish communities have suffered conspiracy theories, and maybe while the ways in which it happened have changed, Jewish communities have suffered from these conspiracy theories for generations and know better than most of its terrible effects. In fact, beliefs in a Jewish conspiracy are the most persuasive aspects of anti-Semitism. Already more than 600 years ago, the Black Death spread across Europe. Short of knowledge, local population turned on the ones they had educated for generations to despise. Jews were blamed for poisoning the wells. For centuries, disappearances would be casually explained by blood libels, accusing Jews of kidnapping Christian children to use their blood in the baking of matzah. No matter that all blood is religiously forbidden for Jews. These conspiracy theories about Jews have been ingrained for centuries across many cultures in both Europe and the Middle East. Their paintings, their writings, even on the walls of the churches. Conspiracies and dehumanization paved the way to exclusion and discrimination. First factual, then legal, and finally to extermination. The Nazi propaganda machine relied upon conspiracy fantasies, including that of a Jewish world conspiracy that resulted in the murder of 6 million children, women, and men in the Shoah. After the horrors of Holocaust, people all over the world questioned themselves how it could happen. We thought that the lessons of spreading false narratives and hatred had been learned. In particular, anti-democratic regimes are heavily associated with conspiracy theories. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a fabrication of Tsarist Russia, while Communist Poland conducted the so-called anti-Zionist campaign, and today Iran spreads the lie that the world is controlled by 2,000 Zionists. These conspiracy fantasies do not die easily. They just morph into new versions. The all-powerful Jew or the nefarious hand of Israel. According to a survey by the European Commission, the most dominant anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are about Jews ruling international, financial, political, and media institutions, which comprised 89% of anti-Semitic content in German language and 55% in French. In other parts of the world, there is the widespread conspiracy fantasy that the Jews of Israel are responsible for the September 11 attacks. Modern blood libels are today less about matzah and more about suggesting Israel is harvesting the organs of Palestinian children or poisoning the water supply on the West Bank. The COVID-19 pandemic has turned into the perfect breeding ground for the spread of conspiracy theories. People were stuck in their houses with only a computer screen for company, liking and sharing the wildest and most dangerous conspiracies. As so often, many of these conspiracy theories shared online specifically target Jews and Israel. Jews and Israel are being accused at the same time of creating the disease, of spreading the disease, profiting from the vaccine and using it for the population control, but also for having a secret vaccine. And while I can only speak for the Jewish experience, I must stress that conspiracy theories specifically target and affect other minority groups, which are in consequence marginalized and persecuted. The only difference is that conspiracy theories today spread much faster. Once they could be posted on a tree and transported to the next village. Now they can be sent out with one click to all corners of the world. Online disinformation has fueled and empowered extremist groups and individuals to act with impunity, taking advantage of their anonymity. The same media that is being used to spread negative messages and conspiracies must be used to spread truth and facts, to widen debate, and not to stifle it. There are trends that cross borders and require concerted action. That is why we must mobilize everybody, not only civil society, academia, and educators, but also IT companies whose responsibility is to ensure environments free from hatred and discrimination. I trust that this symposium will set the tone for an ongoing international conversation on one of the most important issues of our time. We are proud to partner with UNESCO, the Alfred Landecker Foundation, Cambridge University Social Decision-Making Lab, and the European Commission on this important occasion. Please know that the European Jewish Congress will always be your partner in this fight. I wish you productive deliberations in today's symposium, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Kalenova. This was a fascinating overview across time, space, and cultures of conspiracy theories. And our last opening remarks will be delivered by CEO of the Alfred Landecker Foundation, Mr. Andreas Eberhardt. Please.
Dear Vice President Kalenova, dear Katharina von Schnurba, dear Dr. Schuster, so many friends here in this room, dear UNESCO and EU Commission representatives, honorary guests, dear friends. First of all, I want to start with thanking our friends from partnering organizations, especially the European Jewish Congress and UNESCO for our collaboration in organizing this event. We are a very young organization, so we started 2 years ago, and it's really an honor to be part of this event. And thank you for all your efforts to the whole teams of both organizations. In a world more and more shaped by crisis, global conflicts have become wicked problems. The more unstable our political environment becomes, the higher the rise of anti-democratic, hostile ideologies. In this context, anti-Semitism is on the rise too, fueled by the pandemic and targeted disinformation. Conspiracy ideologies were problematic before the pandemic. They will be problematic after the pandemic. They can and have lead to offline violence and murder. Not every conspiracy ideology is anti-Semitic, but anti-Semitism does not work without a conspiracy. It was just mentioned. Shortly after the so-called storm on Germany's parliament, only 1 year after the creation of the Alfred Landecker Foundation, we therefore decided to focus our efforts towards combating conspiracy theories. There are many fine activists in this room who ever since collaborated with us. CMAS, the Center for Monitoring, Analysis and Strategy, Miro Dietrich is here. Cambridge University, Research, Alliance for Europe, Hate Aid, and many more. We are especially proud of this new generation of activists, as the work is fundamentally based on the idea that on and offline worlds are not only intertwined, but inseparable. The problems that arise with conspiracy ideologies need agile and adaptive countermeasures. The Russian invasion of Ukraine only illustrates the adaptability of these ideologies. Many of those Telegram channels that would spread QAnon or anti-vaccine narratives would immediately switch to spreading Russian disinformation, as conspiracy spreaders seize the opportunities for sowing division as they offer themselves. A recent CMAS study shows that 20% of German-speaking Europe are more likely to follow conspiracies around the Russian invasion, with Telegram being their major news source. At our foundation, we believe that the online world needs to be consequently monitored, analyzed, and understood to face the virality of these dangerous ideologies. Reflection leads to evidence-based and, in consequence, much better action. The future of democracy will be decided online. And a strong civil society needs to navigate through these waters. Conspiracy ideologies are extremely complex and intertwined with different kinds of narrow worldviews, hate, and violent extremism. This is exactly why combining research, education, and advocacy is crucial. We are lucky to see many diverse perspectives represented here today. At the start, some of us, and this was also mentioned before, some of us might have laughed at conspiracy ideologists, and maybe even the people falling for them. When we realized how big their reach became, we grew silent. By now, we have come to learn how systematically the enemies of truth and liberal rights are working on disabling our order. In conclusion, I want to use the chance to underline just how important it is that we take this issue as seriously as we can in educational spheres, and that we implore on policymakers to join us in this cause. Whenever the topic of crisis management will be discussed, we should have conspiracy theories and disinformation in mind. And we are seeing it day by day, actually in this time of a war. We are all here because we understood the implications of these developments online, and therefore we want to take joint action. I trust that your collaboration in the second part of the day will be fruitful. Let me close by emphasizing the Alfred Landecker Foundation with its self-understanding of an incubator for civil society aims to make these connections and take risks where necessary in order to give our democracy the digital update it needs. It is due time to not only draw a red line, but that match the resoluteness of those attacking the way we live. Thank you all for your work, for your commitment, and for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eberhard. So as I was saying in my introduction, the purpose today is to make this discussion as pragmatic as possible and equip us with tools that we can actually implement. Our next session, we're going to look at a policy document by UNESCO, equipping specifically educators, as our focus is through education, equipping educators with what they can do in order to address conspiracy theories in the classrooms in a more effective way. And for this, I'd like to invite on stage the head of the UNESCO office in Brussels, Madame Louise Haxthausen, please.
Thank you very much, and really a warm welcome to this symposium. And thank you very much for joining today to discuss a matter of pressing urgency, as I think has been highlighted by all the previous speakers in the introduction session. I would like here to express our particular gratitude to the European Jewish Congress, in particular Raya Kalenova, Ariela Wojcik, and to the leaders of the Jewish community of Europe present with us today. Education is indeed an indispensable investment to address the significant impact of ideologies that seek to divide our societies today and undermine the key values that underpin peaceful coexistence and democracy. Human rights education and global citizens' education in particular aim at equipping young generation with the skills and knowledge necessary to reject all forms of hate, engage responsibly in public debate, and strengthen their critical thinking in the face of disinformation, conspiracy theories, and identity-based propaganda and incitement. Today, at this symposium, as you said, it is my pleasure to launch a new publication that supports teachers in this endeavor. Indeed, UNESCO has produced this publication to guide educators when teaching about conspiracy theories. This task is not an easy one. Conspiracy theories are extremely complex, as was mentioned before. They are linked to narrow worldviews, hateful prejudice, and sometimes violent extremist ideologies that are challenging to address with learners, but also the more important. We know that it is very difficult to change the mind of somebody who already believes in conspiracy theories. This new guide, therefore, provides teachers with information, strategies, and pedagogies that help to strengthen the resilience of learners. It also outlines approaches on how to best prepare and conduct lessons that respond to conspiracy theories if they are shared by learners in classroom settings or outside classroom settings. Conspiracy theories seem to be especially present in European and North American discourses today, but we have found that there is a global need to address them. The guide has so far been shared with teachers from 9 countries worldwide when we were testing it, and we got an overwhelming response for more guidance and more support to address this topic of rising concern. We're here to respond to this demand. Today, we hope to not only launch a resource, but to also engage in further discussions on how to better support education systems in addressing conspiracy theories through partnerships, new programs, and joint action. And really, again, it's lovely to see that we are so many gathered for this common endeavor. This new guide is a first step in this direction. It is an important contribution by UNESCO to implement the UN strategy and plan of action to counter hate speech. I invite all of you to consult this new guide on UNESCO's website, and we'll now look at a short video that outlines its key objectives. In conclusion, and before we watch the video, allow me to thank again all our partners in this important endeavor, the European Commission, the Cambridge University Social Decision Making Lab, the Alfred Landecare Foundation, and especially the European Jewish Congress. We thank you for your generous support, for co-organizing the symposium with UNESCO, and for also your collaboration in producing the video that we will now watch. Thank you.
Conspiracy theories are not true. They come in coded forms and can be difficult to detect, yet they seem to be present everywhere, on social media, in the news, in conversations with family and friends. The best defense against conspiracy theories is knowledge. Teachers can help learners to be aware of conspiracy theories, their appeal and rhetoric, before they fall for them. Teachers can also help learners to acquire the skills to spot and debunk them. This task is not easy. Conspiracy theories are complex. They play with the human psyche and can shift entire worldviews. To address and counter them, teachers need to know what they are, how they cause harm, and how to discuss them with learners without amplifying them. With this knowledge, teachers can address the fears that may lead to believing in conspiracy theories, sensitize for prejudice and biases that fuel conspiracy thinking and hate speech, warn about their rhetoric and techniques, dismantle the flawed logic behind them, and engage with learners and colleagues who are misled without pushing them further away. You can prevent the spread of conspiracy theories and the harm they cause.
So while most of the speakers today, before and after this video, are looking at conspiracy theories from the outside, our next speaker is someone who actually knows these communities from the inside. He's managed to infiltrate fringe groups, conspiracy theory communities around the world in order to analyze them, write about them, and alert us about them. I'd like to invite our keynote speaker, Tobias Ginsburg, to tell us about your experiences as someone who's seen these communities from the inside. Please.
Good morning, and thank you. Thank you very much, not only for this invitation and the opportunity to speak to all of you today, but also for taking on this immensely important topic. A topic that is unbearably urgent right now and that is very important to me, personally. It was almost 13 years ago that I've started with my strange occupation. I infiltrate groups and organizations one should really stay clear of. Anti-democrats and anti-Semites, neo-Nazis, Islamists and extremists. I lived in cults. I spent time in militias and all kinds of fringe groups. I want to understand what drives these people into hatred. I want to look behind their self-presentations. I want to grasp them as human beings. My task is to comprehend what makes hate desirable and how can we stop it. And unfortunately, you just heard it, right now there's no shortage of hateful groups and ideologies in this world. So time and time again, I took on a new false identity and snuck out. And the one thing all these groups have in common, conspiracy theories. They are the greatest kettles of hatred, the most powerful instrument of demagogues and profiteers, and they are the basis of an extreme right-wing thinking that has been growing stronger and stronger over the last decade now, and are endangering all of our democracies. It is a disaster. how we have long regarded conspiracy theories as curious, as fringe, as bizarre and dopey, how long we trivialized their potential for violence. I come from Germany, a country where conspiracy theories were once the raison d'etat, where it led to inconceivable murder. And yet, we seem to have forgotten that the far right and conspiracy ideology belong together. They are inseparably linked with each other. I also had to learn that, let's say, firsthand. It was the very first time I investigated undercover. I started that peculiar method of research more or less by accident. I was a young student back then, in my early 20s, and maybe a little naive, researching the continuities of Nazism in Germany, when I stumbled across a network of right-wing extremist organizations consisting of publishing houses and student fraternities and think tanks and so forth. It was a network of all too wealthy and all too well-connected folks and organizations who would rise to prominence just a few years later, ironically under the deceptive label of the new right. People who would essentially deny me and my friends the very right to exist. Very scary, no doubt, but I was gripped by curiosity. I picked up the phone and I called one of those student fraternities in Munich. On the phone, I gave myself the brilliant undercover alias of Tobias Günzburg. I couldn't think of anything smarter at that moment. I just changed one letter, the extra umlaut, Günzburg, instead of Ginsburg. I didn't think that would work. I didn't think I would be invited, but it did, and I was. Because after all, I am a man, and I'm white, and I look like this. That is enough. I can enter those places where no one should set foot. For me, there are hardly any no-go areas, and as a German Jew, I am used to assimilation anyway. In other words, I can get a close-up look at that what scares me. And this very first close-up look, well, yeah, that was really scary. For all of you who don't have a mental picture of the time-honored German fraternity tradition, it is a spectacle. Imagine university students in 19th century costumes, gold-studded uniforms and feathered hats, nostalgic rides with hyper-nationalistic slogans and terribly heavy beer consumption. Several of these German frat boys proudly wear scars on their faces, the result of traditional fencing and bleeding, and just as many of them belong to the far right. I knew that, kind of, but I didn't know what that actually meant. I had entered a nightmarish world of hate and alcohol, neither of which I was accustomed to in such raw quantities, and most importantly, I had never experienced this quality of hate before. Sure, you don't have to go to a fascist fraternity to experience racism and misogyny, anti-Semitism and homophobia. You can find plenty of that elsewhere. That's rampant throughout society. But this hatred was new to me. It was ice cold, studied, and rationalized. I sat there, overwhelmed and frightened, and around me a seemingly endless stream of murmurs about sinister plots against the German people and against the white race. Cultural Marxism wanted to eradicate the traditional family through political correctness and homosexuality. Orchestrated immigration would wipe out the Occident, I learned. And what was said about the oh-so-powerful and vengeful Jewry, I suppose you all can imagine. To this day, most of us associate conspiracy theories with something like irrationality, lability, maybe even insanity. But that's not it. The very first time I was in the midst of genuine and avowed fascists, and their conspiracy craze was serving a function. It legitimized their anti-Semitism. It rationalized their racism. It gave their eliminatory rage against Muslims and immigrants the appearance of self-defense, a perverse logic. Yes, I can understand the hellish appeal of this ideology. Their world was neatly tidied up into good and evil. Conspiracy beliefs offer a brilliantly dangerous mix of self-empowerment and performative victimhood. Not only do you state yourself as the ultimate victim of the grand conspiracy, but you place yourself as a supposed resistance fighter above the rest of society who are either too stupid or too drowsy to understand your righteous hatred. You become a just warrior against the rest of the world. That's attractive. After many, many hours, I fled the scene, drunken and disturbed. I was trembling and I felt ashamed. How could I feel safe in this country? How could I have not known about this? But I reassured myself. I had been with fascists, with the dregs of far-right student fraternities. What could I expect? Sure, in such a beer-soaked secret society, madness about cultural Marxist conspirators, dying traditional families, and the replacement of the white race could flourish. But not out here, not among us. There must be a line, some sort of boundary between them and us. That's what I really thought back then. On an October night in 2009, shortly before fanatic fantasies of impending doom became mainstream again, before the extreme right gained strength worldwide, before conspiracy theories became ubiquitous and it became apparent that there is no line between them and us. Indeed, by now these conspiracy theories have become sadly commonplace. Phenomena that a decade ago were only known from the fringes of society broke free. Large parts of Western societies are open to these conspiracy theories. Fragments and variations of these crude ideas flood the internet, can be found in best-selling books and in major newspapers. They can be heard in speeches of politicians, even from the mouths of heads of state, be it the Brazilian, Russian, or until recently, American president. The few remaining boundaries blur, not only between them and us, but also between aggressor and victim, between prey and predator. And it breaks my heart. It really does. I understand why people are drawn to these easy answers in difficult times. Listen, whenever the world becomes more complex, after disasters and wars, after economic crises, and yes, of course, after pandemics as well, conspiracy theories flourish. During the lockdowns, I frequently attended demonstrations, witnessing again and again how frightened and confused people, far from adhering to far-right ideas, suddenly ate up the easy answers of right-wing demagogues and profit-mongering charlatans. Because clearly, a silly virus like SARS-CoV-2, that just doesn't make a good villain. I cannot see this virus, I cannot smell it, I cannot taste it, I do not understand it. And that's why I should have my freedoms curtailed? That's why people have to die? Well, a great conspiracy on the other hand. An evil Jew like Lord Rothschild or a nasty tech billionaire like Bill Gates, yup, those are enemies you can grasp. I get that. So many people told me happily about their newfound conspiracy beliefs, and maybe that really was successful anxiety reduction. You trade our real-life apocalypse, which is barely intelligible and dreary. You trade it for an easily understood apocalypse, full of demons and villains, full of heroes and adventure. And I also witnessed what happens to these people in the next instance. How they sacrifice their whole lives for this delusion. Because who really believes these conspiracies is quickly lost in nightmarish worlds. Just imagine waking up in the morning and you believe in a war all around you. And at night you go back to bed and this war in your head rages on. It is an unbearable condition and many people simply perish under that weight. So yes, I plead for empathy without reservation. Because first and foremost, these people are destroying their own lives. And then, in a possible second step, they endanger or destroy the lives of other people. Because if you believe these theories, and if you think these theories through to their ultimate conclusion, if you really believe that the state and its lackeys are after you, then you will eventually come to the same final solution as my fascist comrades from my Munich fraternity. You must act in self-defense, no matter the cost. I got to know frightened people who became esoteric New Age followers and anti-vaxxers during such protests. And that might have seemed harmless, but soon they drifted away. They participated in the so-called storming of Berlin, the attempted assault on the Reichstag building just a few months later. In the US, I met rather unhinged guys who hoped Donald J. Trump might help them fight off the cultural Marxist conspiracy and give them back their right to traditional families and to their real masculinities. That too seemed far more crude than dangerous. Soon after I spent time with them, they were co-organizers of the Capitol insurrection in Washington, D.C. And whenever there's another murder killing spree or terrorist attack, whenever there's a new manifesto chock full with conspiracy theories and hatred, a sharp pain hits me. The fear that this time I might know the gunman. And while that has not been the case yet, I still feel that I know these murderers. I know their logic. And yes, these inhumane outbursts of violence are just that, logical. Whether you think of Utoya, Norway, or Christchurch, New Zealand, of Halle or Hanau in Germany, of Pittsburgh or El Paso in the US, or Buffalo, New York, just a few weeks ago. Each and every time it was conspiracy theorists who became the perpetrators of unfathomable violence. Because that's the logic conclusion. So, what can we do? I myself find the notion unbearable that all conspiracy addicts are gone in their ideological swamp, that we lost them to the demagogues and fascists. I honestly believe that we have to fight for these people's lives. But I also know just too well how hard that is, how grinding the debunking of myths is, how dangerous such an outreach can become, how eerily short the path is from unhinged conspiracy nonsense to right-wing extremism. Just trying to help these people is dangerous as hell, a Herculean task, and a labor of love at the same time. I am all more grateful for the theme of this symposium today, because maybe the only tool we really have at our disposal is education and enlightenment. Looking at the blood-stained history of humanity, to warn against these ideological mechanisms, to expose the ideology behind conspiracy beliefs. Before something like this can take a hold, that is what we must succeed in doing. And I very much hope that here, today, we will take an important step in that direction. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Tobias, for this very rare testimony, which was so full of courage, sensitivity, and also empathy. I think this will be a perfect segue to our first panel, in which we'd like to bring academia and international organizations in order to see what we can do with that wisdom and insight that we just heard from inside these communities, what can be done through education and other means. And for this, I'd like to invite to join me on stage or on the screen. Do we have Sander van der Linden, director of the Cambridge University Social Decision Making Lab, joining us remotely? Is he connected? Okay. I suppose we'll see him at some point. Jurgis Filsinskas. You will excuse me, did I pronounce it more or less? Okay, close enough. You're Deputy Head of Division for Strategic Communication and Information Analysis at the European External Action Service. Thank you for being with us, Jurgis. Tristan Mendes France. Here you are. Please join us on stage. You're lecturer on digital cultures at the University of Paris. Pick a chair, just keep me this one. Thank you. And last but not least, member of European Parliament, Ilana Sicurel. Please join us on stage. We can give them a round of applause. I don't know if we're back to shaking hands, but we can try. Okay, and do we have Sander with us? Can we see him? 1 minute? 30 seconds. Okay. Well, I guess I don't need that. Or otherwise we... Bear with us, it's all happening live. Or otherwise, maybe we can bring him in as he connects. Jurgis, if I can start with you, perhaps. So we just heard from Tobias about...
I'm here.
Is he there? I hear him.
Oh yeah, I'm connected.
Okay, we cannot see you yet, but I'll conclude maybe by my question to Jurgis. Great to have you with us, Sander. We just heard from Tobias about organic groups, ideas that develop within our own communities. From what I gather from this testimony, these people believe in what they're spreading online, but you are dealing with ideas that are spread in our societies by malign external actors who are doing it on purpose without necessarily believing in what they're spreading in order to destabilize our societies. Can you tell us a little bit about how that actually works, what we can do, and maybe briefly if the effect is different? Is it different when the source is external and strategic, geopolitical, rather than someone who actually is nourished by their own hate and spreading it for ideological reasons?
Thank you very much, Dan. I mean, it's a lot of questions in one. I'll try maybe to a little bit unpack, and I'll probably start by saying that autocrats actually love conspiracies, because conspiracy theories really gives them a great, platform to go after their motives. And of course, their intentions, of course, are basically to, in most of the occasions, to cut the trust, in democracy, to cut the trust in our own institutions, in our courts, in our parliaments. So, for many of these authoritarian regimes who actually use sophisticated means and who actually devote a lot of resources to target European Union member states with their disinformation campaigns. Conspiracies is basically a perfect platform, if you like. And why it is so attractive to them is, of course, it's due to a couple of things. I mean, one thing is that Tobias already, I think, mentioned, is that conspiracy theories are essentially impossible to debunk. It's basically the check it out. The premise is like the shadow rulers of the rulers. How you debunk that? Even if you start debunking by saying you're not providing evidence to that, that will play into their logic. If there's no evidence, there's clearly a conspiracy behind it. And definitely many of these governments are for sure helped by the fact that conspiracy theories are indeed part of our popular culture. I mean, we've all read Tintin, we've all watched James Bond. This kind of plays a little bit into that, let's say, into that logic. I think the other sort of thing that I would mention is that you know, some of the countries that wage these disinformation campaigns, and I have in mind in particular one big country, which was already mentioned by Andreas, Russian Federation, they also tap into conspiracy theories because, you know, they can fill them with any content they want, you know. So you know, yesterday it was bankers and, you know, maybe Rothschilds. You know, today is feminist, big pharma, gay lobby, and, you know, even myself as a EU bureaucrat, you know, I'm actually also, you know, part of these some of the conspiracy plots. And, you know, you actually, you know, in this case, you know, if you are sitting somewhere in St. Petersburg and Moscow, you know, and you want to arrange that attacks, you know, you don't need to explain anything, you know. You just put a blame on people, you know, saying they're stealing the money, they're waging the wars, you know, they are trying to disrupt traditional, you know, way of thinking,
Is the effect
Christianity.
similar?
So exactly. So, you know, the effects, of course, the effect is super difficult to let's say, to assess, you know, what's the impact of that, right? But I think the impact is definitely there. It's different in different countries. It's different, you know, for the different audiences. But the fact that you have years and years, you know, for example, plots of deep state being sort of transmitted onto European audiences, it means, you know, that to some degree they are working. I mean, and
Otherwise, they wouldn't be happening.
they wouldn't be happening, you know. And if you really, if you do some polling, you know, you would probably be very, very surprised, you know, that the man behind, for example, color revolutions in, you know, in Georgia, in Ukraine, and other countries, it's George Soros, you know. It's one of the well-known Jewish philanthropists and businessmen, you know. If you go further, you know, we'll probably discover, you know, a lot of similar things.
So if I can resume what you're saying, it's happening because it's easy, it's happening because it's available, and it's happening because it's working, otherwise they would not be doing this. And I'd like to get back to you in a few minutes also about some of the solutions, and also in the next panel we'll talk about some methods. But if I can move on to you, Madame la députée, donc vous êtes dans la commission d'éducation et
You work in the Committee on Education and Culture, and I know that you are deeply committed also in France. We are focusing today on education as a tool. So what is the role of education? What could we do? A document would be a possible tool to help teachers. Do you see other roles or other means? Good morning to all. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to UNESCO and the European Jewish Congress. I think that this is a key issue, and I think that this is just the start of an international and multidisciplinary work. I would like to answer your question, but I would like to broaden the scope a little bit. Audrey Azoulay quoted Hannah Arendt, a famous thinker, and the challenge is huge. It's not only about to protect the truth against the lie, but it's to prevent the lie from becoming a reference. When you speak of disinformation and lies, once again, it means that there is a truth that could be re-established. And Hannah Arendt had already identified that you have a moment when facts are no longer taken into account. And this is what she also said in another text. You no longer have a common ground to stand on. And democracy is holding because they are a lively debate, but they are based on well-recognized and shared objectives. So what can be done to protect? And by the way, if you look at large democracies, and sometimes we're coming too late, let's try to maybe put the question in another way. What can be done so that a majority of citizens considers that facts, objective facts, are a common value? This is a common reality that should bring us together. And unfortunately, I see that the situation is really worsening. You have a kind of a tipping point. If you question this factual truth that is bringing us together, that is unavoidable, and if you are questioning this factual truth, well, of course, you might no longer be convinced. So what you mean is that we are losing this common base, the common ground. Yes, the factual truth. And this has been said already. This is a very dangerous time because we have now the internet, we have this revolution, and whereby there is no longer any filter in the way information is shared. And so as soon as you have uncertainties, worries, a major crisis, people feel attracted to the big narrative that will allow you to leave this very complicated situation. I agree with Tobias about empathy. We have to understand how those people are falling into this, and we have to make a difference between the perpetrators and the victims. And of course, victims are much more numerous than the perpetrators. So what can we do to have this common ground? What can we do really to be brought together by a truth, by the truth? And of course, there are always discrepancies. But I believe that what we need to start with is education, a good education. The fight against disinformation doesn't take place on another planet. And the recent IFOP data showed that amongst those who believe in those conspiracy theories, in 5 cases out of 10, you have 35% of youngsters who do not have an education, or you have more than 60% belonging to popular classes, or those who are not educated at all, and they believe that they are really outside the society. So I can answer in the following way. And I know that, of course, we have to go beyond education. When you fight for an increased purchasing power, when you fight against unemployment, if you want Europe to become an energy power, you fight against those plots. Then we have to improve and increase education, the educational levels. And this is a European fight. And I agree with you, the European education space is a new approach. It is the first time that the EU is decided to have a global approach on education. And as members of parliament, amongst those objectives, we have decided to include the fight against conspiracy theories. Talking about digital education, we have an EU digital plan, and this was a decision made by the Council in 2016. More recently, the European Commission started there a big plan, and we will have the opportunity to train teachers on digital matters. So very concrete things are being designed. I also believe that each time we try to start a new approach in education, we have to think about the quality of education. The quality of education should be a priority. And we need to fight against disinformation, and how can we teach this? And so I would like now to share with you some tools, some instruments, some innovative tools. So we have the European education space, and they are also funded tools, and I could give you 2. The European Teachers Academies. This is a brand new 25 European Teachers Academies. Those are actually places where teachers can share knowledge. Of course, it is at national level, but sharing good practices could turn the EU into a huge educational power. So in 2025, we will have 25 academies, 10 were selected. If you are very quick in September, you can apply and make an offer about an educational project addressing this theme. And then there will be another call for projects in September 2023. So those are our concrete steps, and I think that we have to use those opportunities. And I'm not only thinking here of teachers only. We have something to suggest at EU level. And then there is a second tool that I would like to share with you, and this was one of my proposals. We tried to focus on Europe within schools, making Europe the beating heart in schools. And under the French presidency, a European module has been set up. We are not talking here about harmonizing the training of teachers, but we would like them actually... No, I'm talking of educators here. So this is a European module whereby you can learn more about the other educational systems. You can share good practices. This is a real revolution. It is based on European values. And I also think that in those European modules, we have to raise awareness on disinformation, which is a real danger. If you are a teacher of science or math, for instance, you should be able to benefit from this training. So this is a real revolution, because I think that this would be a key advantage for our European teachers. There are pedagogical innovations everywhere in Europe, but we believe that we need to focus on this fight against conspiracy theories. Let's use those European training modules so that European teachers are made aware, are sensitive to this issue. And I would like to conclude with this, and I know that we will be able to hear more from educators. It's not providing a kind of history lecture on conspiracy theories. Of course, this could always be interesting, but I believe that we need to help youngsters. We have a very nice project in science, and we try to make sure that youngsters can really experience things. So it has to be cool to be a fact checker, for instance. Of course, there is always a downside. You know, they have to be aware that not everything should be believed on the internet. So we want to train youngsters. We want them to become real players, real actors. So let's try to use the available European tools, but we also have to have a common benchmark. And so I think that we should also have the opportunity to finance and to fund all those tools. So the EU should be able to finance those projects, because, of course, we have in front of us some enemies that can really dedicate millions to disinformation. So we do not want to finance a propaganda. We are going to finance those complying with our key values and principles. But of course, we also need money to be able to resist this wave of conspiracies.
L'Union européenne avec l'éducation, c'est pas où le monde aller plus fort, mais vous dites qu'il y a pas mal de...
As you're saying, we have many projects going on in the field of education, and, of course, in the fight against anti-Semitism.
Hear you, which is even better than just hearing you. So I'd like to turn back to you, Sander. maybe from an academic perspective, I'd like to very briefly ask you to give us your definition of conspiracy theories, just to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing here in the room. And I understand that we've spoken about education at large, but you have specific tools that you have developed, pre-bunking and inoculation, that are your methods that you consider effective in tackling conspiracy theories. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about these two.
Sure, yeah. So I think academically what we mean by conspiracy theories are, they're really not theories insofar that it's just an idea that there are some people, a group of people who are colluding in secret to, bring about nefarious intentions. So it has a particular structure, and sometimes we use an acronym for this called CONSPIRE, and each letter stands for different elements of the conspiracy theory. So you have persecuted victims, you have incoherence, you have nefarious intentions, you have reinterpreting randomness. So there's actually a pattern. So if you take those little bits, you can actually create a conspiracy theory out of nothing with those building blocks, because they're always the same building blocks. So there's always
somebody who believes that the world is flat or that we've never been on the moon, that's not a conspiracy theory. That doesn't fall within, as long as there's no hate speech in it, this is out of our scope. Just to be this is just nonsense. Because this is also something.
No, I mean, the flat Earth and NASA fake the moon are conspiracy theories insofar that there's a group with flat Earth. There's a group of people who are hiding the truth, which are the scientists, and then there's and they have nefarious intentions. They're there to mislead people. They're also reinterpreting randomness in the sense that they're observing things that appear to have a causal structure, where in fact there is no such structure. For example, they will often look at photos and say that the horizon is flat. Well, they can't see the curve, for example. And so there are all these hallmarks that almost every conspiracy theory has. So Sandy Hook, QAnon, there's always a group of people acting in secret to bring about harm to some individuals. And they use these sort of elements, 5G and coronavirus. Again, it's just a coincidence that there's 5G masks and outbreaks of the coronavirus. So they're reinterpreting sort of random coincidences to have a meaningful causal pattern. They're blaming a particular group of people. And this is my point, perhaps more relevant to the definition, something we call incoherence. So the definition of a conspiracy theory is often that it hinges on another conspiracy theory. So, for example, if you try to debunk the idea, and somebody brought this up earlier, which is a good point. If you try to debunk a conspiracy theory, then you are either part of the conspiracy theory, or there's a superordinate, a larger conspiracy theory, which can explain the inconsistencies that you've identified in the actual conspiracy. So they will just jump a class. So, for example, if you say that here's some pieces of rock from the moon, and so these are verified moon rocks, they will say, oh, but there's a bigger, intergovernmental conspiracy that involves the United Nations and everyone, and all of the New World Order, and they're all working together to fabricate this evidence.
So it's a psychic debate, and there's no answer. I mean, there's no argument that would convince someone. That's what you're saying. And regardless of the scientific evidence that you would present, they would always find basically an explanation of why we're all being deceived.
Yes, exactly. And psychologically, exactly. That's psychologically why it's so difficult to address conspiracies, because they follow what we in academic terms call a monological belief system. So it's a self-supporting structure of beliefs. And if you try to, take one down, they'll just jump up to another belief that can explain the whole lower structure.
Okay, with that, so with that clear idea and definition, maybe we can talk about pre-bunking and inoculation.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've tried to explore is, because debunking is so difficult in this context, is to try to preemptively inoculate and protect people from what we call the conspiracy effect. This type of thinking is very contagious, right? Because people are very drawn to the idea of conspiracy theories. And the idea of inoculation really follows the medical analogy. So just as you, rather than trying to debunk things after the fact, just as with the regular vaccine, where you preemptively inject people with a severely weakened or inactivated strain of a virus to try to trigger the production of antibodies to help confer resistance against future infection, you can do the same with disinformation and conspiracy theories. By injecting people with a severely weakened dose of the tactics that are used in the creation of conspiracy theories, you can build up cognitive or intellectual resistance in people so that when they're actually attacked or come across a conspiracy theory, they've been inoculated and become more immune.
And that goes back to education. That's equipping them with the right...
And sorry, go ahead.
That goes back to education of equipping people with the right tools in order to be able to detect conspiracy theories.
Absolutely. But it's slightly different from education in the sense that, rather than giving people more facts, what you want to do is give people a small dose of the conspiracy theory and then pre-bunk it in a very persuasive manner so that people become inoculated. And so this is a crucial difference to highlight. It's not bad to give people facts and broad education, but the crucial differentiator here is that in order for people to become resistant to particular types of attacks, they need a weakened simulation of what that attack is going to look like, help people identify the structure and the underlying building blocks so that they become more resistant overall. So, we can call it education, but, it's a slightly kind of novel approach from the traditional way of relaying facts.
Thank you for that. Tristan Mendes France, donc on a parlé de la technologie.
We talked about technology. We heard Mrs. Kalinova telling that in the past it was just posting the information on a tree. Today it's different. Lies are circulating 6 times quicker than before through the internet. We have through a simple click, we can also disseminate conspiracy theories very fast. Undoubtedly, today's information is circulating very quickly, and this is, of course, based on social media, social networks. Social networks have created a global, deregulated market of disinformation, of the offer of disinformation. So we clearly have before and after social networks, because social networks were a historical moment for conspiracy theories that were related to historical and local specificities. But all of a sudden, they were disseminated throughout the world, and this through the internet, through social networks. So we have this technical ground, which is a reality, and which has changed everything. The very moment of COVID, within this digital revolution, has been an acceleration factor, because COVID was a global phenomenon, and social networks are a global phenomenon. So conspiracy theories that were global have been able to develop and to circulate. So it was really a turning point for conspiracy theories to develop. And different players also had more opportunities. First, small influencers, local people that you can follow in France or elsewhere, through social platforms and the algorithm, they were able to reach an audience that is much wider than what they would have been able to do in a normal society without social networks and without algorithm. And this deregulated market of information is, in Europe especially, is a playground for people from other countries, from abroad, from authoritarian countries, where information is very much controlled on the territory as such. Well, such people can now take advantage of this open space of disinformation with, as a relay, the conspiracy groups already present in the target countries. For instance, Russia. Russia became an expert in the field. Russia is not behind all global disinformation, but they propose an offer of disinformation, and Russia tries to find the communities that will be used as a relay. In France, the major relays of this Russian conspiracy is no longer Sputnik and others that cannot broadcast anymore in Europe, but conspiracy groups, for instance, which are very close to what is around conspiracy about COVID, or the far-right conspiracy groups, or more or less violent religious or extremist groups. So Russia is going to use these communities just as a relay to disseminate the disinformation further. Let's take the example of Russia. When Russia has been identified as a propaganda tool in Europe, Russia used its international Russian diplomacy network, which is present on all social networks. Today, the major relays that were RT and Sputnik are now the Twitter accounts of ambassadors and diplomatic staff of Russia all over the world. They are present on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and they are using these relays, these social networks, through the diplomatic protection, because, as you know, social platforms do not want to block the account of an ambassador or a diplomatic representation. And through these relays, Russia is very present all over the world. Through these diplomatic networks, Russia, in the different languages, can further disseminate its propaganda.
One is the foreign actor who's trying to infiltrate our information systems. The second one is technological platforms. And the third is organic communities. And it sounds like these three are really reinforcing each other. If it weren't for the communities that Tobias were talking about, it might have been more difficult for actors like Russia to actually spread their ideas. But so the two are kind of symbiotic. Does that make sense? And without the technology, as we're going to discuss in the next panel, also it would be more difficult to spread these ideas. So we really have the perfect storm here with the intention, the means, and the objective. Everything is there to make it happen.
Oui, et puis il y a aussi le fait que
Yes, and this ecosystem, this world market of disinformation is also fueled by the best and the worst of everything we have all over the world. We have this global market of disinformation on conspiracy theories, which are shared by everyone. But then in one country you can have one idea, one conspiracy idea that works, and if it gains attraction in one country, in one given country, it can move on to other countries and at the end have a global reach. So it has to be successful at a local level first. Indeed, it's like a Darwinian selection of the best and the worst in the worst conspiracy theories around COVID, Davos, and anything. If a document has been identified on COVID, for instance, which is a bad interpretation of certain figures, well, if it works, for instance, in Germany, if it is successful there, it can jump to another country and finally disseminate all over the world. Yes, as you say, there are examples everywhere.
The age factor. So you described earlier, Tobias, young adult students. We are talking about mostly, I would say, adults who are spreading these ideas, but to which extent are children susceptible to these ideas? maybe you, Madame la Députée, from the perspective of education, are children consuming these kind of ideas? Are they even interested, or it goes over their heads and geopolitics are not their thing? I mean, to which extent do we have data about the way in which children are exposed to these kind of ideas and how they react to it?
Ce qui est certain, c'est que
at a very, very young age, we are exposed to conspiracy theories. I refer to the European area of education. We have to take this very seriously. I am very serious when I say that education to the media, to sources of information that you can trust, this has to start at the level of the kindergarten. I have 4 girls, and I don't think that they have been exposed to conspiracy ideas. Well, of course, in this room, maybe we are more equipped than other persons, and we know about this phenomenon, but this is also a question of resistance. We have this weapon of massive disinformation, and we have to resist, we have to react. And this resistance has to be based on education. Alain Bentolida just published a book called The School of Resistance. But yes, we have to realize that we are a minority in our conception of truth. So I am a fighter, but we have to realize that at a very early age we are exposed to disinformation, and that's why we have to start helping our children through education at a very early age. We really have to organize a revolution, because this is our responsibility vis-à-vis the future generations. We have to train the future generations, and it is a very sophisticated and complex phenomenon. We have to go through also third parties. As you said, as Tristan said, we have this wild stage of information. With the Digital Services Act, Europe made a first step ahead regarding illicit or dangerous contents be removed from the different platforms. Again, this is a very serious debate. So we have to resist, but at the same time we have to be proactive. We have to make proposals. We have to be more powerful, so that we can also circulate messages, facts that are serious.
To education, I'm not sure if we have data on the way in which children react when they're exposed to conspiracy theories, but maybe Yogis or Sandra, can you tell us, are children being targeted? Are these sources of conspiracy theories trying to target children, or is it more of an adult conversation?
Well, I think maybe I can remember one case, where we had this targeting, which was related essentially to the famous climate activist Greta Thunberg.
Okay.
And of course, her community, is essentially very young. These are the children, and they actually, the actions they did, protest against, inaction on climate change. This was quite a thing. And I have to say again, if we're looking at some of the state actors, right, who are, for example, not interested at all in, let's say, pushing forward the agenda on renewable energy sources, right? They actually went ahead and tried really to demonize what Greta is doing, and I mean, in our own disinformation database, EU versus disinfo.eu, I mean, you can find a lot of cases, when in particular Russian state media actually tried, basically to say that Greta is actually is not, a leader of the movement of
okay,
young
but you're not
people.
describing targeting because she's young, but she happened to be young. So what I gather is that we need to focus on education, not because children are being targeted, but because that's when we start, we equip ourselves with tools to be able to filter information. So it's not about targeting children as such.
Well, but I mean, Greta in this case was basically targeted, as a young leader, basically implying that there's a deep state behind her. So we again sort of come to this conspiracy plot, that there's somebody actually controlling, the civil society organizations. There's somebody, influencing public opinion and so on and so on. And actually, this is a well-tested strategy, unfortunately.
Yeah. We're nearing the conclusion of this panel, so indeed I'd like to turn to you, Tristan and Sander, if you have last ideas on education, children, and the way they are part of this game.
L'un des problèmes majeurs, c'est la.
One of the major challenges is the way in which the new generations will receive the information. The youngest will go to TikTok, and there is a real issue here. Something is really at stake. How are we going to educate young people to digest, to understand the information on TikTok if we do not know the cultural language, the challenges of TikTok? So the words, the vocabulary of TikTok, we have to manage this vocabulary, because conspiracy groups will use that vocabulary. They know about the codes of the youngest generations. Yes, indeed, they know about this language, and they are also usually quite young. What is difficult is for learners to understand the cultural language of young people. A meme, for instance, is something which cannot be understood by someone who is not part of this community. But he will be able to disseminate conspiracy theories. Indeed, on Twitter, it's the same. Let me take one example, a pizza, for instance. So the emoji of a pizza on TikTok. But during a period of time, it was a way to refer to the Pizza Gate, which is the basis of the Quanon movement. So this idea of people wanted to exploit children. So a pizza, how can you imagine that a pizza is linked to this conspiracy theory? In a nutshell, you have to understand the way in which young people are exposed to concepts, to things that educators sometimes do not manage, do not master. So we have to get this, to master this digital culture, to be able to understand this phenomenon. Okay, we have to be careful when using a pizza emoji.
The point is that the developing brain is definitely susceptible to these kinds of thinking patterns. So what you see often, and these are not targeted conspiracy theories, but for example on TikTok, you see this huge wave of what they call manifesting, which is basically a form of magical thinking. So it's very much related to superstition. You have a lot of pseudoscience on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, and pseudoscience and magical thinking are very closely correlated to conspiracy theories. In fact, research in the UK with adolescents shows that around the age of 11 to 14, children start to become, or young adults start to become interested in conspiracy theories, and the belief starts to increase at those between those sort of ages. And in fact, a lot of young people see a lot of disinformation on the internet. So I think it's a critical age to start inoculating them. And then, as we've done with our tools, we try to produce games, animated videos to try to reach young people as well and engage them with the sorts of apps that they entertain themselves with at their age. But I would say it's definitely a risk factor.
Okay, I'm sure we can continue this debate for hours, but I'm given signs that we have to conclude this first panel. So let me thank once again Member of European Parliament Ilana Sicurel, Tristan Mendes-France from University of Paris, Sander van den Linden joining us remotely, and Jurgis Filsinskas from the European External Action Service. Thank you very much. And before we go to our next speech, we are very lucky to have with us Vice President of the European Parliament and Special Envoy on combating religious discrimination, including anti-Semitism, Ms. Nicola Bell.
Dear honorable guests, distinguished panelists, was really interesting. Thank you for these insights. Dear friends, I would like first to thank European Jewish Congress and the UNESCO to organize this event today. I think it's really an important symposium, and I'm really honored that I have the possibility to speak and to address you today. After getting this morning the most valuable insights on what can be done to combat conspiracy theories by education, I would like to share with you my perspective on this topic. My perspective, of course, as a parliamentarian and especially as Vice President and Special Envoy of the European Parliament on combating religious discrimination, especially anti-Semitism. In that capacity, I experienced the effect on conspiracy theories of fake news, malicious disinformation, and hate speech. They all are elements of attacks against democracy, against our liberal societies, against our social cohesion, against religious minorities and ethnic groups, in short, against all of us. And I think this has to be emphasized, that these are attacks against everybody, against all of us. Whatever and which actor stands behind it, the effect is always destructive. There is always the potential that conspiracy theories lead to a loss of faith in scientific expertise and the reliability of media, to political disengagement, to violence, and even war. Conspiracy theories have often served and are still serving as motivation and justification to commit hateful crimes or to exert violence towards human beings. The most horrible conspiracy theory with devastating consequences became the ideology of Nazi Germany and led directly to the Holocaust. In my capacity as Special Envoy, combating anti-Semitism is one of my highest priorities. In Europe, in addition to religiously motivated anti-Semitism, Jews have been targeted by conspiracy theories for centuries, being falsely blamed for diseases, economic crises, and wars. Throughout history, anti-Semitism is closely and inextricably linked to conspiracy theories. It is fueled by them. You can't think the one without the other. And today, in the 21st century, unfortunately, and we had some of the examples, conspiracy theories and anti-Semitic narratives are on the rise again. They flourish in the context of COVID-19 pandemic as well as in Putin's brutal war against Ukraine. In the months before the war, the propaganda of denazifying the Ukraine and the claim of genocide on Russian minorities in Ukraine increased significantly. It has been stretched by government sources as well as by traditional and social media and has been supported even by religious leaders and the official Russian church. With perfidy that could hardly be surpassed, the Russian government then linked the accusation of Nazism with anti-Semitic rhetoric against the Ukrainian government. Every such surge of anti-Semitism puts European values such as respect for democracy, human rights, rule of law, fundamental freedom, good governance, and the stability of our society in danger. It is for this reason that I'm glad that all of us come together here to discuss and share experiences on how we can address, prevent, and combat conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism. Because one can't counter conspiracy theories only top-down by laws and government. We need a whole society approach. How should we deal with conspiracy theories? What is needed to be done? The way people think and build their opinion and beliefs is influenced, and we heard some of those examples today already, by family, school, media, peer groups, and leaders. In all these areas, we have to find ways and instruments to avoid and combat conspiracy theories effectively. Reaching convinced conspiracy theorists by counter-arguments is difficult. Some say that it's impossible, as we heard from Sander van der Linde here today. This makes it all the more important to prevent people from adopting conspiracy theories at an early stage and to build resilience in our society and educational systems. I'm thinking about teachers who have such great influence on our youth. It is crucial to be able to discuss mechanisms and the danger of conspiracy theories in classrooms, strengthen critical thinking as well as empathy in order to challenge stereotypes and hatred. Teaching materials, study cards, as well as textbooks needed to be reviewed on a regular basis and adapted to an educational free of discrimination, racism, and violence. Teachers and students at school and university need to be sensitized to the issue. And I found especially the example that Ilana Sikorel puts here in the panel on the common model of teaching the teacher is really a good piece for exchange of best practice. We should not allow for propaganda to find its way into the classrooms. We need to be vigilant. Therefore, I want to thank UNESCO for their just launched advocacy document for teachers to address conspiracy theories. In today's world, we have to become quicker at adapting to media developments. Especially on social media platforms, conspiracy theories spread fast and reach thousands, if not millions of people. DSA, so the Digital Service Act, is a game changer for creating a safer digital space free of anti-Semitism, yes, but we need to catch up. We need specific programs on media education at school curricula. Analytical skills and a critical approach to sources are crucial in order to be able to classify and evaluate information. Think before sharing, for example, is a campaign by UNESCO in collaboration with the European Commission, Twitter, and the World Jewish Congress to stop the spread of conspiracy theories online during the COVID-19 pandemic. More campaigns like this are needed to raise awareness and sensitize users of social media to the danger of any conspiracy theory. And also to sensitize never to be silent when get across conspiracy theory, never to accept the false argument, never to give room to the spread of hate and lies. With regard to combat anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish conspiracy theories, the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism has to be widely adopted. We need common ground on which we can identify, prevent, and combat anti-Semitism. Additionally, we need to think about how law enforcement as well to become better at preventing anti-Semitic hate crimes through assessing security threats based on conspiracy theories. We should not allow the dissemination of hate and lies. We have to stand up against the culture of impunity, and we need to defend our democratic values by all means. We have to call things like they are. We have to call the Temple Mount a Temple Mount and Wailing Wall a Wailing Wall, recognizing their historic roots. But we have at the same time to protect the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, and science. We have to defend the right to be wrong. This is sometimes very, very hard to bear. But we have to if we don't want to destroy our freedom by trying to protect it. We have constantly to define the narrow paths. Where are the limits of freedom of speech and where does the hate speech start? What is a conspiracy theory and what is just a wrong argument? For this reason, I want to encourage all of us. Let us join forces on all levels so that we sooner rather than later build a world without anti-Semitism, without discrimination, without racism, and with respect for all religious beliefs as an integral part of our society. Thank you for everybody who is engaged on this.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. And you said it, we need all strands of society. And that's what we'll try to do now in the next panel, to bring practitioners from different industries and to see what they are doing in their professional environments in order to tackle this very complex question, as you just mentioned. And for this, I'd like to invite to join us on stage Miro Dietrich, your researcher at the Center for Monitoring, Analysis and Strategy, CMAS. Welcome to Brussels. Julia Moser, Public Affairs at Twitter, which was prominent as one of our interesting platforms in this debate earlier on. Rudi Reichstadt, founder and director of Conspiracy Watch. He will tell us in a moment what that is. And Priyank Mathur. You will correct me. He's joining us remotely. Is he with us remotely? To correct my bad pronunciation? No? Yes? Yes, here you are.
Pronunciation was perfect. Yes, I'll do it.
Priyank Mathur, you're founder and CEO of Mythos Labs, and you will tell us also in a moment exactly about the interesting work that you do over there. But I'd like to start with you, Miro. So social media have been raised as one of the important factors. I called them an agent before. You are specialized at the intersection between technology and conspiracy theories. Would we be having this discussion today if it weren't for social media? No offense, Julia, but would it still be happening?
I think social media definitely play a big role in this, and not only like we heard earlier in the spread of information that's just so much quicker with social media, but also with the effect of social media that they praise themselves, that to connect people. Earlier, a lot of believers in these conspiracy narratives were pretty isolated in their communities that they were, but the internet, the social media led them to find other people and to sort of build new collectives that enable each other in these beliefs. But when you talk about the issues of conspiracies and social media, I often see a really passive look at people. Often it's seen as, when we talk about this, is that people fell down rabbit holes, and it's seen like social media is this foreign thing that came to us and sort of persuaded us. Like people just have to see 3 bad tweets and suddenly they are believers. Mm-hmm. So I don't only want to talk about the supply side and how to regulate this, but also I want to highlight more the demand side. Why are people seeking out these things? And if I look back on the 7 years that I've spent in these digital alternative communities, I see 2 big points. Not to depoliticize them, but I think 2 points that lead people in these alternative realities and especially make them stay there. And when I talk about this, it's digital communities. So we see a defragmentation of communities. The big church communities, the union communities, the big families aren't there anymore. So people feel pretty lost. We've seen this in the pandemic. So they seek out other communities, and they find these in the digital world. And the other thing...
But then why would they fall for these fringe ones and extreme ones? Why not find a legitimate, kind community, go do sports, play tennis? I mean, why does it have to be so full of hate?
That's the second part, that we are missing the big narratives for our lives. We are missing meaning. Mostly work is presented to us as the fulfilling part of our life. For some, that's not possible. Others don't find that fulfilling. So these conspiracy narratives in these far-right alternative communities give us a sense of purpose. For example, if you believe in QAnon, suddenly there's an epic fight of good versus evil around the world. It's full of spies and dangerous things, and you are helping children getting rescued. If you look at the terrorist of Halle, the shooter, he had a longsword in his car. So he definitely saw himself as sort of the crusader of saving the world. And I think that's really sad that these communities have a hold on communities and on narratives, because finding communities and finding a purpose in life is one of the best qualities that we have as humans. And I think this will be really complicated to offer alternatives to this, because the simple narratives of the simple black and white stuff is really complicated to find better narratives against these. And I think through education we can definitely inoculate people to get to sort of to see more the world in a more complicated case that it is. And I think looking forward, it's a really big problem that people not only believe in racist ideas or anti-Semitic ideas, but that they are in these communities, because then they're sort of lost to the world, they're sort of lost to an alternative reality. And we see that the crises are getting more and more. And with every crisis, we have a part of our population that is not involved in the solution of the crisis. It's actually making the crisis worse, as we've seen in the pandemic. And I think when we look to the future, the climate crisis and more crises to come, this will be a huge problem if such a big part of a society isn't reachable for information anymore.
What I find very interesting and also a bit alarming in what you're saying is that if we spoke earlier, Madame Sicurel was telling us about the prototype, the demographics of the person who's more susceptible to follow these ideas. What you're describing, the need for a community and the need for a meaning is something that we can all prescribe to. We all need that, just a question of whether we fall in the wrong, in the wrong place. Maybe to move to you, Julia, so Twitter has been mentioned in the previous interventions. We heard that lies spread 6 times faster, and we all know how easy it is to send a tweet. I mean, I don't know how many of the conspiracy theorist tweets actually spread, but it's very easy to just do them en masse, and then some of them will have their effect. Now that we've heard also a definition in the previous panel about what conspiracy theories are and what they're not, do you at Twitter have a way of measuring how much conspiracy theories is spread, your impact among other platforms on this very dangerous phenomenon? What kind of in-house work are you doing first to understand it yourself and then to act on it?
So there are a couple of things that we're doing, and maybe it's worth starting by sort of like just a quick sort of principle on our approach that is really to empower people who use our service to critically engage the content that they see. And that really underlies a lot of the work that we're doing. And I would need probably hours to sum everything up, so I'll just try to highlight some of the parts.
Take 4 minutes.
4, right. Policies, actions, and also talk a bit about the research aspect and give you numbers throughout to sort of like what we can measure and what we see on the platform. So our overall approach and a long belief has been that content moderation needs to move beyond the removal or leaving up content, because it's the binary approach does not fit the information environment that we have these days. So what we've been doing, and a recent example is the war in Ukraine now, is elevating credible information and reliable information, and at the same time limiting de-amplifying information that is misleading.
So that's within the algorithm. The algorithm is going to prefer tweets that are considered more credible. That's exactly what Zuckerberg and Facebook was refusing to do, to be the one who's deciding on what is true and what is false. That's not my job to decide what is true.
So it's through a series of features on Twitter. So we have Twitter lists and Twitter moments. When you search for information around Ukraine, you would get a curated list of news sources from credible and authoritative information that is created by our curation team that are trained in this and have background in journalism mostly, and other backgrounds as well. So these two happen at the same time, providing you ideally better quality information and helping you to find reliable information, especially in crisis. But also connecting to conspiracies and just how we're all aware that when it comes to emerging crises, there is a lot of information, it's rapidly changing, it's a sort of volatile environment. So in the past weeks, we rolled out a new policy, crisis misinformation policy, that specifically focuses on emerging crises. We've been implementing it in relation to the war in Ukraine, and we'll look to expand it over time. But basically what it does is that when you have accounts that are high profile and they share information that might be misleading, and it is proven to be misleading by 2 or 3 credible sources, then we apply a warning notice, which says that it has been proven misleading by sources, but we leave it there for accountability reasons. So it's a very nuanced approach, and this is why it's also difficult to explain it in 4 minutes, because this is just one part of the sort of all the policy updates that we rolled out throughout in the past weeks and months.
But we're talking about the kind of warnings that we used to see with President Trump that says...
A label, basically.
Okay.
But it's not just a label in a sense that you don't see the tweet itself, you see the warning notice, and then you have to click through if you want to see it. Exactly. So there is these nuanced approaches. Now, there's a lot that's happening also on the content moderation side. But I also want to highlight here, especially because of the topic of the symposium and because we're talking about education, that there is a lot that can and needs to be done on the prevention side. So this is also something that we continuously looking into, introducing safety measures that include muting keywords or banning accounts, but also prompts that help you when you're scrolling through your news, your tweets. So that would help you, for example, giving a practical example, when you want to retweet an article without clicking on the article itself, you'll be prompted that headlines don't tell the full story. And we found that it actually helps in, I think, if I'm recalling the numbers correctly, 40% of people clicked on the article after getting the prompt. And I think it was around 30% who decided not to retweet it, which is fine. Not everything needs to be shared. I think we agree with that. So this is a sort of on the proactive or the prevention aspect, in addition to some of the media literacy work that we've been engaged with also with UNESCO and the European Commission before. I'm happy to talk about that later. And just to sort of like get to the second part of all the actions that we've been doing, perhaps it's also worth mentioning, again, in relation, I'm bringing a lot of examples from the war of Ukraine, sadly. But we also saw that we've been applying labels to state-affiliated media accounts for a long time and expanded it to tweet levels and rolled out a specific policy for countries that are engaged in interstate conflicts and at the same time limit freedom of information in the countries. So de-amplification was applied for accounts as well, and we have some preliminary numbers that prove that these accounts received 49% less reach. Also, their tweets dropped to 25%, and the number of accounts that engage with these also saw a drop of 49%, which are pretty good numbers in a sense, proving that de-amplification can also be effective in tackling some of these issues. And finally, I spoke a bit about also prevention, and I think it deserves a bigger space, but I will just move on to the last point on research in general, because needless to say how important it is when it comes to not just tackling hate speech and conspiracies, but in general as a fuel and as a soil for actions that we do. And so in terms of numbers and measuring, we provide access to researchers through our API, which allows researchers to really see and point out what is happening on Twitter. It's fully public, as we all know. It provides a way to come up with solutions and also to helps us to improve and learn, which is something that we continuously do. I could go on also on the research part, but I will stop here now and
no, but I think it's interesting because on both your sides there are researchers and also joining us remotely. So I mean, I'm interested maybe to move on to you, Rudy. So we've heard about some of the methods that have been developed. I know that you at Conspiracy Watch also have very original approaches, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about some of the other tools that Conspiracy Watch has developed. And I don't know if maybe in the second round we can hear if this access to the data from Twitter has been serving the research community in better understanding conspiracy theories. But please.
Alors, tout d'abord, je voudrais dire que je me réjouis.
First of all, I would like to say that I am delighted to be here. One of the ways to answer to those theories is not to overlook them. And I think that for a long time, people have tried to explain that this was a non-issue and that, of course, it was urgent to do nothing. So I think that it's a very good thing that now European institutions focus on this issue. We celebrated our 15th anniversary. And in 2007, at that time, there were already conspiracy theories going on in some radical spheres, and it was affecting people whose profiles was not necessarily an extremist one. So Conspiracy Watch was created because we were convinced that we had to be present in this digital space. We wanted to bring an answer to the conspiracy theories. We wanted to bring answers, so we produce information, articles, videos, as well, podcasts, because we want to inform the French-speaking audience. This is a French-speaking site, and we want to inform on those conspiracy theories. Conspiracy Watch became also an open source intelligent site. We try to document the players of in those communities. They do not always write under their real name. They use pseudos, and very often, more often than they think, we can identify them. So this is another major part of our work. Let me now address one of our projects. Ileana Sicurel, you referred to the IFOP research or survey, and we have been involved as well in this survey because we really wanted to have a better understanding of this phenomenon. We had a stop aid money geared by Tristan Mendes. We wanted to know more about the funding sources. We are now working on another project, which is an interactive mapping of the conspiracy sphere in the French-speaking world. And so we will also write some articles on this. We publish a high number of information notices that are regularly updated. We have approximately 450 as we speak, but there will be maybe another 600. Is this a blacklist? No, those are simply pieces of information addressing the conspiracy spheres or conspiracy media, and there are hundreds out there in the French-speaking world, and also protagonists. In France, we have Alain Soral, Dieudonné, but there are many others. And each time there is a crisis, for instance, they come out. No, it's not a list. It's simply a kind of notification. It's almost an encyclopedic work. It's not based on a collaboration, and it is our team that is doing this. But of course, conspiracy theorists do not visit your site. Well, we do have another project because we really would like to break those filter bubbles. Because, you know, when you fall into the conspiracy rabbit hole, you might be exposed to sources of this type. So in order to break those filters, we try to use a wide array of information, and we try to reach out to those who might do this kind of research on Google. We do have a partnership with Google. And thanks to this partnership, we can also push for ads that will refer to those information notices. So if you search for those themes, those conspiracy media or persons on Google, there is a likelihood that you might be exposed to the first research result, which is one of our information notice. And we have been experimenting this now for 3 years together with Tristan. And this is an example of pre-bunking. Of course, this is not a panacea, but it is a way of anticipating those conspiracies, because when you have an information-related risk, at least the critical resources are already available. In November 2020, we faced such a scenario. We saw the appearance of, on platforms, of a long conspiracy movie called Hold Up. It was a French movie made thanks to crowdfunding, explaining that the COVID-19 pandemic was a fake one, that the aim of the vaccination was actually a genocide to kill the world population. There were accusations against Jacques Attali, Bill Gates, and you name it. And so 40 persons who were totally unknown in the mainstream media took part in this film, and we had already identified them because many months prior to this film, they had already expressed themselves. And so when the French media was able to address this issue, they were able to rely on the pre-bunking work that Conspiracy Watch achieved.
Whether it's the gatekeepers like Twitter and Google, which are critical in this battle, and sorry, I lost my line of thought. But also the press. So basically, it's not directly only with those who might be following this, these kind of ideas, but basically, it's a little bit, as the vice president was saying before, it's a whole ecosystem of actors, of policymakers, of technological platforms, of civil society, of researchers who need to feed each other. And with this, I'd like to turn to you, Priyank. So we've discussed a lot the different tools of pre-bunking, debunking, inoculation. And we also discussed a little bit the psychology of people who are spreading and following conspiracy theories. But I'd like you to tell us a little bit about Mythos Labs and specifically about your decision to use the humor in addressing conspiracy theories. It's not the first emotion that would come to our mind. It's not intuitive. But why humor, and to which extent have you found it effective using comedy and humor in order to dissuade people from following conspiracy ideas?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And I'm sorry I couldn't join you all in person. So hello from a beautiful, sunny Kuala Lumpur. But to your question about Mythos Labs and our relationship with using humor, you know, I have to say a lot of it is informed by my own background. I was a counterterrorism intelligence officer for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security a long time ago in the first Obama administration. And I was also in another life, even before that, a comedy writer for The Onion, which is a satirical publication in New York. And we wrote for our TV show, Onion News Network, as well for a couple of years. So in my life, I've always been really interested in comedy and in national security and in online now mis and disinfo. And one of the reasons, one of the insights, as you correctly mentioned, Tom, we do use humor. We do two things. Primarily, we use technology and what we call edutainment, so sort of an entertainment or humor-driven approach to counter online mis and disinformation, violent extremism, and online harm in general. You know, I'd be happy later on to talk more about how we're using technology and AI-based research, and actually to echo our colleague from Twitter's point that, you know, Twitter has been great for us to use their APIs from the tech side. But on the humor side, I had a head writer, well, actually, even better than her, I had, there's a quote that I really like from Oscar Wilde, who was a comedian in the 19th century. And he said, "If you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh. Otherwise, they'll kill you." And I think that's really true in our line of work when you're talking about sensitive issues.
I don't know if you can hear it, but people are laughing here in the audience in Brussels, so we're definitely hearing the truth from you now.
Well, I'm glad to know that. Yeah, so I think, you know, everybody in Brussels, in any form of government or civil society, you understand exactly what he meant by that. And one of the things that we found with humor, so practically it's the most shareable form of content. I heard you reference, I think, the MIT study earlier that fake news can travel 6 times faster than real news. Well, there's been many studies also that have shown that the type of content that people are most likely to share, if you are looking by tonality, so emotive content versus dramatic versus text-based, etc., humorous content again and again, and I'm sure Julia will back this up, has the highest tendency to go viral. So from a purely practical point of view, creating your counter narratives or your alternative narratives using humor is more likely to make them reach a broader a number of people. But beyond that, the thing about humor that we found is it's disarming. So I'll give you an example. We made a video in India that was funded by the US State Department, and it was the first video we actually made. So everyone was a little nervous using comedy. and it's called I Want to Quit ISIS. And if anybody's interested, you can go to our website, check out the video. It's hosted on YouTube as well. We partnered with comedians. It's very, very important to partner with local comedians. We can't be sitting in Brussels or Washington, D.C. and creating counter-narrative videos to debunk conspiracies in Uganda or India. It has to be local comedians who write the script, who use a local sense of humor. So we partnered with a local group called East India Comedy. They were very popular. They had 1 million YouTube subscribers. We made this video. It's a sketch. It's a 5-minute video. If we had more time, I'd show it. But it's about a young man who joins ISIS, thinking it'll be all action, guts, glory, gets there, and he's making photocopies and doing very boring white-collar work, and he wants to quit. And they say, okay, you can quit, but you have to go through an exit interview first with ISIS's HR department. So in the exit interview, he explains why he hates it there, and in doing so, he debunks all their false narratives, all the conspiracies that ISIS is trying to promote, but in a funny way. And we were really nervous when we made this video, because for anybody who's ever traveled to South Asia, you're making a video about ISIS. We had the 2 main characters quoting verses from the Quran. You know, we thought anything can happen. People can take this the wrong way. There can be very sensitivities around it. But we saw no bad backlash. A lot of positive press. CNN did a story on it, Times of India, Hindustan Times, and everybody loved it. A lot of civil society groups, religious groups came out in support of it. And I think the reason is because you can either laugh or be offended. It's very hard to do both at the same time.
But wait
if
a
you
second,
are offended
no
by a
backlash, but
joke,
what's the impact? How can you measure the impact of this kind of humorous videos?
Sure. So beyond just reach in terms of how many views and all that, we also do this thing where we call micro-expression recognition algorithm. So basically, we do a focus group. So that video was for young men in South Asia. So we got a focus group of about 60 young men to watch the video. And with their consent, we recorded them watching it. And we fed that recording to a micro-expression recognition algorithm, which can tell that, okay, at minute 125, Julia's left eyebrow went up by 0.2 centimeters.
It
That
actually did
86%
right now,
of the time, yeah, is a sign, exactly, is a sign of anxiety or surprise or whatever. So then we go back to the video and we see what happened at minute 142. Ah, we said the word hadith, or we said, you know, jihad. Okay, so this tells us this is how this word, not just the video, but how specific words, characters, symbols actually are making people feel. And there are some also beyond that ways that we can track this. You can use, Google has a great method called redirect, where if somebody is searching for extremist content, they are shown content like this, counter narrative, and they're looking for QAnon content, they'll be shown something that debunks QAnon, a news story or a video like ours. So you can make sure that you can get it to the right people, and then you can track how it's likely to make them feel. And I'll just give you a very quick sort of, you know, we got a report from one of the embassies in the region. 3 former terrorists in the Kashmir Valley in India, part of a group called Lashkar-e-Toiba, they turned themselves in. They wanted to escape. They left their camp. They surrendered to a U.S. outpost. And in one of the debriefings, they gave a USB drive, which had materials which convinced them to leave the group. There were some PDFs, some writings, and there was also a copy of our video. And interestingly enough, the video had been downloaded and translated into Pashto with subtitles. So somebody else did that. But the point is that this video is not going to change the hearts and minds of somebody who's deeply radicalized, but it might change someone who's on the fence or who's vulnerable. So to echo our colleague earlier, it's pre-bunking or inoculating more than rather de-radicalizing. So I think that's, you know, it's disarming, it's more likely to go viral, and it is less likely to get you killed.
Okay, very original approach. I don't want to feed into the hands of those who are spreading conspiracy theories, but I'm wondering if that would serve them as well. We're going to start seeing theories that are more humorous. Maybe they would also spread more. So I mean, this tactic might work for both camps. To go back to you, it seems to me like social media, by definition, is all about simplification. Twitter is the extreme example of that because the syntax is even shorter. But if conspiracy theories and populism in general are all about simplistic answers, the fact that our rhetoric, our debate have become, you know, reduced to such short messages, that is creating a misbalance in the sense that those populists and simplicists, it's easier for them. And I think it's no coincidence that most successful populist politicians around the world are very good on social media. That simply the platform is made for them. It was probably not conceived with that intention, but in the end, it's easier to spread a simple idea than a complex philosophy on social media. Do you agree that there's something about the very syntax of the platform that is just skewing the debate in one direction?
I think the reason why simple messages spread so far is because people want simple messages.
So first people wanted simple messages, then social media understood that, and now simple messages are spreading on them.
Yeah, going back to the thing, to not seeing as a passive thing, where people just read something and get convinced there's a demand for these things. We often talk about it as it would be a technological problem, but it's a societal problem that we have. We can't just content moderate our way out of anti-Semitism and racism in our society.
So you're saying technology reflects basically society rather than, or the two are feeding each other?
Yeah, it's definitely the need of us for this content that drives the engagement in this way. It's because we want to be enraged, we want to laugh. That's why the algorithms rank this content so high.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the human desire that sort of leads us this way.
Something that social media maybe understood before even the conspiracy theories groups, or not before, but basically wrote on the same psychic need for simplified ideas.
Right, I appreciate Miro jumping in and providing the sort of overall framework and context that we as human beings don't like to deal with complexities.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the issues that we're describing and discussing today here started before social media, but I fully understand where the question is coming from. But we had blood libels, we had the poisoning of the well, like we had these long before social media came to be. And also conspiracies are not unique to Twitter. They are present on social media that have very different formats, don't restrict the number of character counts in any ways. So it's not necessarily that I think. I think also when it comes to conspiracies and hate speech as well, and just in general sort of harmful online behavior, behavior is a key word in that. And this is what we've been looking at, and I'm speaking obviously specifically for Twitter and our content moderation approach in general that focuses on looking at behavior and a pattern of behavior, and also taking context into consideration and how the two work together. And then a range of enforcement actions are coming to place basically. So I think that's the behavior part, and especially when it comes to disinformation, when there is also often coordinated inauthentic behavior, and we've again seen this in the context of the war in Ukraine. This is again the part where we can see that it's not necessarily the content that we need to focus on, but on the pattern on behavior. If there is an account that repeatedly engages in sharing misleading information, for example, or any other policy violations, is there a repeated action that happens? And obviously the context itself, because we know that content in itself doesn't necessarily convey the same meaning without the context. So that's why we take a more nuanced approach, which is definitely harder to scale, but we believe that it's the right approach.
Let me ask you if we can expand a little bit the geographic scope of the debate beyond the Western world, beyond Europe and the United States. I mean, obviously here when we speak about scapegoating, I mean, anti-Semitism is one of the main concerns that we're speaking about, among other groups that are being scapegoated. But maybe you, Berniak, I know that Priyank, feel free to correct me every time I mispronounce your name. I know that you're now in Kuala Lumpur, you're based in Boston, but you work a lot in Southeast Asia and Africa, but feel free maybe to jump in afterwards. Do we see major differences in the spread of conspiracy theories in the Western world compared to other societies? Is the level of education, for example, of a society one of the factors to how easy it is to spread conspiracy theories?
Yeah, are you asking me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you definitely see different conspiracy theories. One of the things, I'm in Kuala Lumpur right now, actually, because we're working on a digital literacy project. And I firmly believe that, to use a COVID analogy, counter narratives are a treatment, but social media literacy is really the vaccine that's going to, in the long run, inoculate people against conspiracy theories and mis and disinfo. And one of the big things that you're seeing in this part of the world now is, interestingly, we've also been researching Ukraine-related disinformation and publishing a series of reports. Mm-hmm. One of the things we're seeing is that you've got a lot of states in Asia and Africa that feel like their voice on the Ukraine conflict is being marginalized and not looked at seriously. I was in the United States 2 weeks ago, and if you read a newspaper or watch TV, it looks like the whole world is against Russia. But then you come to where I am right now, and actually you realize it's just the West. A lot of the world is neutral about this conflict or sympathizes with some of what Russia, what we would call propaganda or disinformation, is saying online. So I think that a lot of the conspiracy theories in this part of the world sometimes are reactionary to what first comes out of the West. And then people sort of react to it, and sometimes that reaction can become extreme enough where it causes conspiracy theories on the other end of the spectrum about how this is all an American plot to overthrow, the non-Western countries, and that they're going to do this to China next, and they're going to do this to India next. And these are the kinds of theories you're seeing here on Discord, on Telegram, on Twitter. So I think it is very different. We have to be careful not to get into a bubble that whatever the narrative in the West is, there's no one set of conspiracy theories with a capital C that the whole world is listening to. That's part of what makes this
in our own echo chamber, a Western echo chamber of our own discourse. Very briefly, last comments from you about taking it out of a more global context. I mean, you work obviously globally. You said you work more in the French context, but Mio, I don't know if you have also a broader view about what's happening in other parts of the world that you're working in.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to understand the conspiracy world, the US market is definitely the driving force. And with elements like QAnon, where there's a global community, it's very easy for content, like we heard earlier, to get from the United States to Germany and get spread around the world. So it's definitely a global problem and not just a local one anymore.
Non-Western world?
So I focus on the EU, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that. But I just want to pick up from Priyanka what he said about digital literacy, because I think that's such an important topic that it cannot be emphasized enough, and not just referring to the previous campaigns that we did, but also the prompts that I mentioned that we also have on when you're about to tweet something harmful. There's a prompt that asks you to reconsider whether you want to actually share the tweet or not.
Think before you share.
Exactly, and there's also all the work that we do with under the umbrella of the Twitter for Good activities, where we really empower civil society organizations and help them to promote the messages that strengthen the media literacy skills of society overall and various countries within the EU. So I just want to add that I sense we're getting closer to closing comments.
You're sensing what I'm sensing, so yeah, the message is being transferred.
So I just wanted to close on that ad because I think it's really, really important to underline it towards the end.
Dernier mot, oui.
Oui, peut-être un mot sur...
Yes, one word on the international dimension, because we work with the French-speaking world, not only in France, but also, yes, of course, Quebec, Belgium, Switzerland, North Africa, Lebanon, Israel. And yes, we have readers in different parts of the world, but we are facing a globalized conspiracy theory. QAnon arrived in France in 2020, in Germany in 2018 already. So we cannot say that we're not interested in conspiracy theories elsewhere. In the summer of 2020, a poll was conducted on the conspiracy theories at a global level. And we've seen that there are different levels of belief in such theories. And what comes into picture is the level of education and also the geopolitical history. Amongst the states, the countries where you have a very high level of conspiracy, you have Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt. And they come from different parts of the world. So they are against the United States, and they have had a very complicated history with the US or the Western world. So this is an important indicator.
Panel as well. So let me once again thank Miro, Julia, Rudy, and Priyank joining us remotely from Kuala Lumpur. So many of the previous speakers have spoken about their dedication to the question of anti-Semitism and what can be done about it. But one person who's dedicated her career to the fight against anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life in Europe and around the world is Katharina von, and here again I'm going to, Katharina von Schnobein from the European Commission, please.
Thank you very much, Don. Yes, so it's a real pleasure to be here with you and to have the honor to summarize a bit what we heard and also to see what the European Commission has been doing in this field. It's an honor for us as Commission to co-sponsor this event, which I believe, has been very rich, also because it brings together, and I think, I mean, we've always been very prone to emphasize how important it is to make sure that the research and that academia are closely connected with policy making. And certainly in the run-up to writing the first EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life that was adopted last October, this was one of the aspects that we took very seriously, to be connected with the community on the one side and with research on the other side in order to hopefully get it right. Now, I will not step into the trap to say everything has been said, but not by me. Yeah, I will briefly say a few things that I have taken from this conversation, and then also go to what the Commission has been doing and will do with regards to addressing conspiracy, including in particular also with regards to anti-Semitism. And I think we saw how closely these two have been related in the past, long before social media, and how they have fueled hatred and have led to a situation where they have created action, also in the past, centuries ago, for thousands of years. And today we see a similar situation. Things are created, not in the virtual world. They are posted there by concrete people. They are amplified by algorithms and other means, and then they take to the street. So I think one important aspect is really to take the virtual world as the real world. And I know for no matter who's in the room here, probably our age gap, how wide it may be, this is not something that we usually think. We still think of two separate worlds. But for my children, definitely, the virtual world is really real. And I think this is one important aspect. We've lived through an explosion of conspiracy now in the pandemic with regards to the war on Ukraine and the propaganda. And let's hope it won't come to that, but it is likely that in an economic downslope, we will see new conspiracy myths mutating again. And unfortunately, in the past centuries, often the Jews have been scapegoats of such developments. What I found really interesting is the idea of inoculation of a small dose of conspiracy myths. I would have liked to know from Xander exactly how you do this, but it's, I think, an interesting thought to a bit like the example also on ISIS, to inject a bit in order to create antibodies rather than focusing only on facts. Now, this is of course something that is a very delicate balance, but we need to step up education, and the whole event today is about education and addressing conspiracy myths through education. And I want to thank also UNESCO for developing, where is Karel and Luisa, yes. Thank you for developing this tool, because I believe that education at an early stage, and we heard that as well, children at the age of 11 to 13 become interested in conspiracy myths. So they need to hear this beforehand in order to have a vaccine and immunity against it, and to know, and I think that's another important aspect why it's not only about facts, but really about this vaccine, to know about the tactics and to dismantle the tactics in conspiracy, because then you don't need to know the fact of every aspect, but you can just see the structure in it. What has the European Commission done? Now, we had our colleague from the so-called Stratcom in the External Action Service here on the podium. They do excellent work. I can recommend to all of you who are in social media to look at what they do, EU versus disinfo. It was created actually after the parliamentary elections, the last ones, because of the interference of Russia already at that point. And it is focused specifically on Russia. However, also because in the propaganda by Russia on the war of Ukraine, anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, Holocaust distortion has been an important aspect. This is one of the areas they also look into, and we work together with them. So this tool has been created, and I think it is something that is very useful with regards to the European Commission and the EAS. In the strategy against anti-Semitism and on fostering Jewish life, we have several activities because, of course, you know, the internet, and I think it was said, if we don't get the internet under control, I think we are endangering democracy. And therefore, it is so important to make sure that we find ways to make the internet again a place where we all want to be, not surrounded when we are on social media by hatred and conspiracy and taking it for granted, because in a way we got used to it. But we would not send our children into an environment on the street that is dangerous, as the internet is, not only to children but to all of us. So we have one important initiative, which is to create a network of trusted flaggers. And I saw a few actors here that might be potential actors to join such a network of trusted flaggers and fact-checkers. So trusted flaggers more with regards to hate speech based on European legislation that needs to be taken down because it is illegal, and what is illegal offline is illegal online. But also the fact-checkers, those who can dismantle conspiracy, disinformation, fake news, with regards specifically to anti-Semitism. We want to do this in all EU languages and also in languages that are not EU languages but transport anti-Semitic content into the EU, and this will be developed also together with the European Digital Media Observatory that was recently launched, which has 8 national hubs, and it is part of one of the actions from the European Democracy Action Plan. So this is a big initiative that will be rolled out as part of the strategy, and the strategy runs until 2030. Another one of the 94 actions that we have in this in the strategy is to launch in January 2023, again together with UNESCO and OSCE ODIHR, and training program, educational training program for educational professionals, so policymakers, but also teachers, to address anti-Semitism through education. And I believe if we look at these two products now together that come from UNESCO, there is a lot of overlap, and I think it really merits to look also how we can possibly, you know, put these two together in these trainings to make sure that we kill, as we say in German, 2 flies with one. Yeah, I don't know how you say that. Now we will also continue what has been mentioned before and develop further the Think Before Sharing media initiative that was really, I believe, something that was developed when we saw how quickly anti-Semitic content was exploding during the pandemic, and in a very short period of time in the first half of 2020, we developed this together with UNESCO and the EJC as well. And I think it's this kind of quick reaction that is also needed often when we deal with the online. Then there's also, of course, the issue about platforms' responsibility. I'm pleased that Twitter is here, and we are, as you know, in touch for many years with the platforms. We have a code of conduct, and we have now created the Digital Services Act, which will lead to more transparency about algorithms, will oblige the platforms to have better redress mechanisms, and also even has the possibility to impose fines in case of non-compliance. So this will be a very important tool. But of course, with regards to conspiracy and disinformation, it's much more complicated because it's not straightforward. It's not something you say this is incitement to hatred and violence needs to be taken down. Yeah, so we have to be smart. But yet, I believe that the Digital Services Act will help with regards to increasing the responsibility of platforms that they have with regards to society and to also their own reputation, I believe. Then there's also, in the same vein, the responsibility of member states to prosecute online haters, those who act illegally on the net or can incite hatred and violence through their actions. Another aspect that we are pursuing with member states. So once again, I would like to congratulate UNESCO for putting forward this important instrument addressing conspiracy theories through education. I hope that it will become this vaccine, that can immunize people against conspiracy and help them to dismantle the tactics that are behind it. I would like to thank the European Jewish Congress for putting all of this together. I think, we've been working for many years together, and it is very complementary, and it is very much appreciated also your actions, Raya. I thank the Alfred Landecker Foundation. I think you've been, since your creation, very quickly up to speed. So thank you for joining, and the Cambridge Social Decision Making Lab as well for contributing to this event today. Close cooperation is key, and I think we see in this event today that when we join our forces, we do have a chance not to despair, but really to bring different aspects to the table that can, from policy making to research to community responses to civil society action, can ensure that we push back on conspiracy and we dismantle them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katharina von Schnurbein. So this concludes the public part of today's International Symposium on Addressing Conspiracy Theories. I will say it, don't worry, I will say it. If you were here or watched us online and found this discussion useful, please join us today at 6 on the Twitter handle of UNESCO, as we will have a Twitter space with more practitioners who will tell us about their ideas and their contributions on addressing conspiracy theories. Until then, let me thank all the speakers who were here today, the organizers, UNESCO and the European Jewish Congress, as well as the European Commission, Cambridge University, and the Alfred Landecker Foundation. Let me thank you, the audience here and online. There is lunch on the first floor. Don't go anywhere. It's served right here. If you're watching us online, go grab some lunch. Join us at 6. From myself, Dan Sobowitz, thank you for being with us, and see you at 6 on Twitter.